Welcome back to the sixth and final lecture of this Environmental Economics Series 2020 for the University of Amsterdam. During this lecture, I will give a year overview, revisit some slides from the past week, and despite much of the adversity, towards the end of this lecture, I will focus on things that we can do ourselves to halt biodiversity loss and climate change, and more generally, reasons to remain hopeful. For today, our reading list included three recent publications, where in Otero et al. We continue last week's theme by exploring biodiversity conservation strategies beyond growth. With Pisek et al., we will go into one of the main drivers of species extinction by looking at invasive alien species. And we will use Lindsay et al. To comment on the threats that COVID-19 poses to the conservation of nature. This year started with extinction. Apart from the bushfires blazing down under, the Chinese paddlefish was declared extinct by researchers from the Chinese Academy of Fishery Sciences in Wuhan. The Chinese paddlefish could grow up to 3 meters. Although still critically endangered on Wikipedia, it may have been extinct for over a decade already and was reported last sighted in 2003. Not only did this year start with extinction, during the first week of this course, we also dived into biodiversity loss, where we explored the expected extinction rates for the coming century based on data from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. You may remember that biodiversity loss is one of 9 planetary boundaries and one of 3 of these that is currently surpassed. The planetary boundaries express ecological limits to our economic activity, implying that we risk harming global carrying capacity by overshooting them. The other 2 planetary boundaries, where we find ourselves outside of safe limits, are disturbances to the nitrogen cycle and climate change, which were dealt with in more detail in subsequent weeks. We also explored the idea of a global carbon budget with McGlade and Akins, where this budget referred to the allowable emissions to have a 50-50 chance of remaining below 2 degrees warming. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it turns out that the widespread availability of fossil fuels rather than their pending scarcity poses the first problems to sustainability. The carbon embedded in current commercially viable reserves is 3 times larger than this budget of allowable emissions. In the first week, I also spoke of the Anthropocene, which has been proposed as a new geological epoch to describe the time during which humanity has started to dominate material flows rather than leaving them mostly to nature. We see this idea expressed rather clearly by Clay and Gradel, who indicate that our collective behavior dominates material flows for the majority of elements. Would you have thought that your economics professor would show you the periodic table? I certainly had not thought of doing so when I started my environmental economics course 5 years ago. However, both thanks to the current events and essays by your predecessors, I became better acquainted with nitrogen pollution and possibly pending peak phosphorus. And who knows what surprises still await me this year. The notion that every environment can only sustain a population of a certain size implies that we face some level of absolute scarcity. In case you wonder what the carrying capacity of our planet is, several have tried to estimate it. In How Many People Can Earth Support, Cohen reviews 65 such estimates ranging from below 1 billion to above a trillion or 1,000 billion. The median estimate is 12 billion. Although the concept of carrying capacity implies absolute scarcity, there is no reason for it to be fixed over time. Economic development through technological progress can increase our global carrying capacity, while imprudent resource consumption can deteriorate our carrying capacity. During the first lecture, I also hinted that land may not be the best example of a scarce resource, as can move our agriculture inside and provide for vertical parks in our cities. Let's watch a 2-minute clip on indoor agriculture by Singapore-based channel News Asia.